Welcome back into the Dewsweepers, everybody. It's always a joy, always informative when we have this golf magazine, Top 100 teacher, join us here on the Dewsweepers. Of course, we're talking about friend of the Dewsweepers, my first golf instructor, Mr. Mark Wood. Woody, how you doing, buddy?
Tony, I'm doing awesome, pal. How about yourself?
Doing great, doing great. Thought we'd talk about something today, about playing to people's strengths, Woody. I know folks come to you, all different skill sets, all different sizes. But you know what? Everybody wants to be a bomber. Everybody thinks that they can hit it further than they do. I thought we'd talk a little bit about how you handle folks and help them learn to play with their strengths within themselves and get more out of their game instead of trying to be something that they're not.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and now's the perfect time of year to talk about it, Tony, is that, with the Ryder Cup coming up in a couple of weeks and the captain's picks, Corey Pavin was trying to make sure that he didn't have all of just one type of player on that team. And what I mean by that is, you've got some rookies on that team, and Jeff Overton and Bubba Watson, who are known for being bombers. They can hit it a long way, but they have a tendency to sometimes miss some fairways. Not necessarily the best putters on the PGA Tour, but you got to understand that you take that with a grain of salt. All those guys on the PGA Tour are phenomenal putters, but some are better than others. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to put guys that have been there. You take a guy like Zach Johnson. Well, Zach is a great captain's pick because he hits his ball relatively straight and is good around the greens and a good putter. So he would be a nice compliment to a guy like Jeff Overton or a Bubba Watson.
Let's talk a little bit about those, those types of players. Let's start with the Zach Johnsons. Woody, I think I use him as an example a lot of times with especially kids coming up, the kids where they haven't grown and they can't hit the ball as far as some of the other kids. And, I never forget when Zach won the Masters, he didn't go for any of the par fives in 2 that week. And I remember thinking that was a phenomenal statistic because one of the things that I always think about when watching the Masters is you think about people going for those par fives and eagling the par fives. And that's a real testament to show you that if you become really good with your wedges, you can really you're not necessarily at a disadvantage, I guess.
Well, and too, you think about it, a guy like Zach gets up there at Augusta and, you're playing 13 and 15, which for the longer hitters, if they can drive it out there far enough, they can get their ball on the green. So there's pressure on the tee shot to hit it far enough to take some of the pressure off of the second shot. Well, if a guy knows that he's not ever going to go for it in 2, so there's no pressure on the tee. I like that there's somewhere where I can lay my ball up, so I don't have to crush this one. I just got to hit a solid shot to go find it. And lo and behold, you find your ball, and it happens to amateurs all the time. The balls that they try to lay up with, okay, I'm just going to take this 7-iron and lay it up short of the creek. Sure enough, they make a nice, easy swing, hit it really solid, and knock it right in the creek. And it's only because they hit the ball more solidly. So, pressure goes, it can be in a bunch of different forms, but to take the pressure off of your driver because you're not going to knock it on the green, what a great way to play golf.
And, you talk about people, hitting the shot, they lay the ball up and they hit the ball, much further because they hit it solid. One of the things I was going to get you to comment on is when folks come to me and they say, I really want to get more distance, one of the real ways you can do that is by learning to hit the ball more solid is one of the real key ways to get more distance.
Well, it's funny. In all my years with the Golf Digest schools and then later on with the Nicholas Flick schools, I remember teaching alongside Bob Toski, and somebody was talking about, distance and it's mass times the velocity squared. He says, well, mass, he says, that's that club head, and velocity, well, that's how fast you're swinging. But he says, if you don't hit it square, that squared part's the part that really matters.
No doubt about it. And, and that's where I think, folks really kind of miss the boat. They're trying to generate, obviously, more speed and don't always hit the ball more solid. And, Woody, we've talked before about how to know when you're a bomber. And I always like the way you've phrased this. Talk a little bit about, what really is long. Most club players, how many times has somebody come to you for a lesson and told you they hit their ball about 300 yards and it ain't anywhere close?
Well, it's generally not close. And to think about it, the guys on tour that are averaging, over 300 yards. Bubba Watson's going to average over 300 yards. So is it Jeff Overton. Well, you know, you watch those golf courses on TV and you see how hard and fast that ball runs. The typical golf course doesn't run that hard and that fast. So for the average club-level player to think that he's hitting his ball over 300 yards is crazy. I mean, a guy like Bubba Watson's maybe flying the ball 275, 280, and it's running out over 300 yards. He's not flying the ball over 300 yards. Now, granted, there's times in which it's downwind or downhill. He might. But, you know, I'll take a player all the time and say, okay, you're a 300-yard hitter. And they nod their head yes. I'm like, okay. So what we do is we find a hole where, you know, and it can be a par 4, but it's got some sort of hazard in front of the green, and I back them up to 300 yards and say, okay, let's find out how many balls you can knock on the green. Well, they can't fly it that far. And I know they can, and after you do an experiment like that where, you know, they've hit 5 or 10 balls in a water hazard short of the green, they realize they probably aren't quite as long as they think.
Boy, you're tough on them, Woody. I'm not that mean.
Hard sometimes. It's tough love, Tony.
I know. I've been there. I've had you dump the bucket of balls out on me before. Tell me to come back when I could get the driver in the air. But
well, you came back.
I did. I was better for it, I think. Anyways, but again, I think it's a great lesson what we just talked about. You know, for the average player, for the club level player, because and along those same lines of not hitting their driver as far as they think they do. I see all the time, Woody, I see these folks that tell me that they hit their 7-iron 165 yards, and that had to be the one time downwind, downhill that they caught it flush, that they did it, and they're playing that as their yardage on every 7-iron shot. And it's amazing how many times they come up short. They put themselves in a bunker. They short side themselves. All kinds of bad things.
Well, you know, the one thing the kind of the testament that I always do, you know, and the people that are out there listening, they play the same golf course time and time again, and they play, so they're familiar. So they pull up on the 7th hole, which happens to be a par 3, and it's a 165-yard hole, and every time they pull one club out of the bag, out of the cart, and they walk up to the tee. And they pay no attention to where the tee marker is, where the pin is, where the wind is. I mean, that same 165-yard hole could be playing 180. You know, or it could be playing 150. It all depends on the scenario. So, you know, I always like seeing players pull out 2 or 3 clubs when they go up onto that. Even if it's your most familiar golf course, I mean, I want you thinking a little bit, just rather than just pulling one club thinking, well, it's just a 7-iron.
You know, and Woody, you're around tour players all the time and out at tournaments, and when I watch them, one of the differences I see between tour players and average golfer is that the tour player really takes into account every variable before they ever get to the golf ball. I mean, they take into account the lie first, the wind, you know, the downhill, uphill, all those different things. And like you said, so many times the club level player jumps out of the cart, looks at where the 150 marker is, and just grabs a club.
You're so true. And when you watch those guys on TV and you watch these guys converse with their caddy, the amount of information that's written down in their yardage book is amazing to me. I mean, they know what club they hit for the last. I mean, it might be the last 4 or 5 rounds, or not rounds, but 4 or 5 tournaments. So they may have 20 rounds worth of data on that one hole. Okay, well, we hit 7-iron here in 2006, and the wind was down a little off the left, you know, and then we hit 8-iron in 2008 in the 3rd round. So, I mean, they've got so much data that they're going through just so they can pick the right club. So these guys, I mean, a yard or 2 makes a big difference. Absolutely.
Now, you know, obviously you don't want people to play slow, but what is the right amount for an average golfer? Woody, I mean, how much data does the average golfer really need to take into? What are the 3 or 4 or 5 things you tell your students to take into account before they select the club?
Well, I'm a big proponent. I mean, I started using one of those range finders that has the altimeter in it that, you know, gives you the slope, how far it's playing. And even when I take the amateurs out, when I'm in Jersey or whatever, and we shoot a yardage, you know, I always tell them how far it's playing. It may be only 142 yards on the ground, but it's uphill, so it's playing 147, 148. So I give them that number. I don't give them the yardage on the ground so they can begin to see what uphill and downhill does to their ball. I think you need to understand uphill or downhill. You need to understand wind direction. And then you need to understand what the ball is going to do when it hits the ground. I mean, is the ball going to release? Is this green harder than another green? And that kind of information you ought to be able to get relatively quickly. And when it's your time to play, you got 30 seconds. You ought to be able to get it done in 30 seconds and go.
Woody, great stuff as always. As always, we appreciate you checking in with the Dewsweepers. Look forward to catching up with you soon.
Tony, it's always fun catching up. Great show. I love being a part of it.
All right, thanks. That's Mark Wood. I'm Tony Ruggiero. The Dewsweepers Golf Show will be right back with more help for your golf game.